I came home earlier than usual that evening, the smell of grease and coffee from my diner shift still clinging to my clothes. All I wanted was to collapse on my bed and forget the world for a few hours. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that usually meant everyone was out. I kicked off my shoes and went straight to my room, thinking about the leftover pasta in the fridge and how good it would feel to finally rest. But when I opened my door, I stopped cold. There was someone in my bed. My stepsister, Kinsley, was lying there, scrolling through her phone like she owned the place. She didn't even look up right away. My chest tightened as I took in the scene. My posters were gone, replaced by framed photos of her smiling with her friends. My books, my makeup, the little things that made my space mine, all boxed up and stacked in the corner like they didn't matter. "Kinsley," I said, my voice sharp. "What are you doing in my room?" She looked up slowly, as if I'd just interrupted her in her own space. "Oh, hey," she said, sounding bored. "Didn't Mom tell you? This is my room now." For a moment, I thought she was joking. I laughed a little, waiting for her to smirk or roll her eyes. But she didn't. She just went back to her phone. I felt my stomach twist. "What do you mean, your room? This is my stuff." Before she could answer, I heard footsteps behind me. My mom and Richard, my stepdad, were standing there. They didn't look angry or embarrassed, just tired, like they'd already decided something and didn't want to argue about it. "Elara," Mom said carefully, "Kinsley's starting college next week. She needs more space and privacy. You'll be moving to the shed for a little while." I blinked, trying to make sense of it. The shed, as in, the one in the backyard. Richard nodded like it was a normal suggestion. "It's just temporary. We'll make it comfortable for you." I waited for someone to laugh, to tell me it was some ridiculous prank. But no one did. They just stood there, looking at me like I should be grateful. "My room," I whispered, staring at Kinsley as she smiled faintly, still wearing my hoodie, the one my dad gave me before he died. That was when it hit me. This wasn't a misunderstanding. They'd planned it. I walked past them in silence, out the back door, and across the yard. The shed smelled like dust and old paint. There was a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, flickering weakly. I sat down on the floor, hugging my knees, listening to the faint laughter coming from the house. I felt small, unwanted, and angry in a way I'd never been before. They'd taken my room, my comfort, even my place in the family. But sitting there in that cold, dark shed, one thought cut through the hurt like glass. They would regret this. A year before all of this, Mom had married Richard. He was charming in the way people who sell houses are, smooth voice, perfect posture, always knowing what to say to make you feel small without sounding rude. I didn't hate him at first. I tried to be polite, tried to adjust to the new version of family Mom was building. What I didn't expect was his daughter, Kinsley. She came into our lives like a breeze at first, smiling, complimenting my clothes, helping with dinner, calling me sis in that cheerful, fake way people use when they're trying to make a good impression. Mom adored her immediately. I could tell by the way her eyes softened whenever Kinsley spoke. She'd never looked at me that way since my dad died. At the beginning, things seemed fine. Kinsley and I would go shopping or watch movies together. She always wanted to know everything about me, what classes I liked, who I talked to, what I wanted to do after high school. I thought she cared. But slowly, her tone started changing. She began to make small comments, the kind that sound innocent but leave a sting. "You're lucky, Elara," she'd say. "You don't have to worry about your future yet. Some of us have actual goals." After she started college, everything shifted. She became distant, snide. Whenever Mom was around, she'd make subtle digs at me. If I came home tired from my shift, Kinsley would sigh and say, "Must be nice not having to study." Or if I forgot to do the dishes one night, she'd laugh softly and tell Mom, "I guess some people just aren't used to responsibility." It worked. Slowly, Mom began to see me through her words. She'd start repeating them. "Elara, you could be more grateful. Or maybe take notes from Kinsley, she's focused." It was like my own mother was being rewired, piece by piece, until she believed I was a disappointment. Richard stayed out of it mostly, but I could tell he enjoyed the control. He liked when things went his way, when everyone agreed with him. And Kinsley knew exactly how to make that happen. She had him wrapped around her finger. I started noticing things, my clothes going missing, my favorite mug broken, my name scratched off the mailbox and replaced with Whitmore and Company. It was like my identity was being erased slowly, while everyone smiled and called it adjusting. I kept thinking it was just a rough patch, that maybe Mom would see through it. But she didn't. Every time Kinsley whispered something to her, Mom would look at me differently, a little colder, a little more distant. I didn't know it then, but Kinsley had been planning everything. She wasn't just trying to win Mom over. She wanted control of the whole house. My room, my place, my mother's trust. And by the time I realized what she was doing, she had already taken all three. Living in the shed felt worse than I could ever explain. It wasn't just small or dirty, it was humiliating. The air smelled like dust and mold, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear every laugh coming from the house. There was no insulation, and at night the cold slipped through the cracks and settled into my bones. I slept on an old mattress I'd dragged from the attic, the springs poking through my back. Sometimes, spiders crawled near my pillow, and I'd wake up shaking them off in the dark. At first, I thought Mom would come out and check on me. Maybe bring me a blanket, or at least ask if I was okay. She didn't. Neither did Richard. They both acted like it was completely normal for me to be out there, as if I'd suddenly become an unwanted guest in my own home. Every time I tried to talk to Mom, she said the same thing. It's just temporary, Alara. Don't make this harder than it is. But the days kept passing, and nothing changed. I walked to work early in the morning, came back late, and tried to avoid seeing anyone. I'd catch glimpses of Kinsley through the window, my window, laughing with her friends, sitting on my bed, using my mirror. Sometimes I'd hear music and voices from inside, like my room had turned into her personal hangout spot. It made my stomach twist every time. One evening, I went back into the house to grab some clothes. Kinsley was sitting on the bed, painting her nails, her friends sprawled around her. The whole place smelled like perfume and popcorn. When she noticed me, she raised her eyebrows like I was interrupting something. I just need my stuff, I said quietly. She didn't move. Which stuff? She asked, pretending to think. Oh, you mean the things Mom said you didn't need anymore. I looked around the room. My books were gone, the photos of Dad and me were missing, and even my desk had been cleared out. My chest tightened when I saw something glint on her wrist, my silver bracelet. The one Dad gave me on my 16th birthday. Where did you get that? I asked. My voice came out shakier than I wanted. She smiled without looking up. This. Mom said you didn't want it anymore. For a second, the room went silent. Her friends looked away, uncomfortable, but no one said a word. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I turned around and walked out before she could see the tears in my eyes. That night, back in the shed, I sat on the floor with my head in my hands. The cold bit at my skin, but I barely felt it. I wasn't sad anymore. I was done crying, done begging to be seen. Something inside me shifted quietly. I didn't know how or when, but I promised myself one thing. I would make them regret what they'd done. And when I did, I wouldn't have to raise my voice. They'd feel it. One night, I couldn't sleep. The shed felt colder than usual, and the wind made the walls creak like they were about to give in. I sat near the tiny window, hugging my knees, staring at the faint light coming from the house. That's when I heard voices. At first, they were muffled, just sharp tones cutting through the night air. Then, as the window in the kitchen opened, I recognized them, Kinsley and Richard. Kinsley sounded angry. You said you'd make sure she's gone before college starts, she hissed. She can't ruin this for me. I froze. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Gone. Ruin what? Richard's voice came next, lower and calm, the same fake smooth tone he always used when he wanted control. Relax, Kinsley. Everything's under control. Your mother's too distracted to notice anything. Once the papers go through, she won't have a say in what happens next. I leaned closer, trying not to make a sound. What about Alara? Kinsley said. She's still here. What if she finds out? Richard sighed like she was being dramatic. She's living in a shed, Kinsley. No one's going to listen to her. By the time she figures out what's happening, it'll be too late. I sat completely still, barely breathing. My stomach turned cold. This wasn't about my room anymore. This wasn't even about Kinsley wanting more space. Richard was planning something bigger, something that would hurt all of us, especially Mom. Kinsley's voice dropped lower. So once you sell the house, we're out of here. Yes, Richard said firmly. The property will be in my name by then. Your mom signed the temporary rights form, remember? She trusts me. After that, we can start fresh. No more drama, no more Alara. He said my name like I was a stain he couldn't wait to wash off. I gripped the edge of the window frame, my fingers trembling. My mom, my own mother, had signed something. I couldn't believe it. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. She'd been distant for months, trusting Richard with every decision. He'd wrapped her around his finger so tightly that she probably didn't even know what she was agreeing to. Their voices grew softer, and eventually, the light in the kitchen went out. I stayed by the window long after they were gone, staring into the dark yard. My breath came out shaky and uneven. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was theft. He was stealing my father's house, the last thing I had left of him. And Kinsley, with her fake sweetness and her lies, was helping him do it. I didn't know what I would do yet, but I knew one thing clearly. I wasn't going to let them win. They thought I was powerless, that I'd stay quiet forever. But they had no idea what I was capable of when I was pushed too far. After that night, I stopped showing my anger. I acted quiet, calm, even obedient. When Mom spoke, I nodded. When Richard gave me fake advice, I pretended to listen. They thought I had finally accepted my place in the shed, and that was exactly what I wanted them to believe. Every morning, I went to work at the diner like nothing had changed. I smiled at customers, wiped down tables, and pocketed every single tip I earned. I didn't spend a cent unless I had to. Every dollar I saved felt like a step closer to freedom, a small piece of control they couldn't touch. Whenever the house was empty, I went inside. I moved quietly, careful not to leave any trace. I started looking for anything that could prove what Richard was doing. In the office drawer, I found property papers, some bills, and a few strange documents with my mother's signature on them. I didn't understand everything right away, but something felt off. The dates didn't line up. It looked like Richard had been moving money around, money that used to be in my father's name. I began checking everywhere. Old boxes, folders, even the files on Richard's laptop when he forgot to close it. I took photos with my phone, saving copies of everything. My heart raced every time I heard a car pull into the driveway, but I never stopped. One night, I was searching through a box in Mom's closet. It was filled with old photos, wedding papers, and other things she'd kept from before Richard. At the very bottom, under some envelopes, I found an old brown folder. It was dusty and taped shut. I peeled the tape off and opened it. Inside was my father's will. My hands shook as I read the first few lines. He had left the entire property, including the house and land, to me. I was the sole heir. Not Mom, not Richard, me. The papers had his original signature, the lawyer's stamp, everything. I sat on the floor, the air leaving my lungs slowly. They'd known. Mom must have seen this and still allowed Richard to take over. My chest burned with anger and disbelief. At the back of the folder, I found another paper, one that explained how Mom had temporarily transferred control of the property to Richard for management purposes. Her handwriting was right there. I felt sick. He'd tricked her, but she'd let him. She'd trusted him enough to hand over everything my father built. And instead of protecting me, she'd let him take it all. I tucked the documents carefully into my bag. My hands were cold, but my mind was clear. For the first time, I had proof, real proof. I wasn't just going to wait for them to destroy what was left of my life. I didn't know how yet, but I was going to take it all back. Quietly. Completely. Without warning. I came back from work late that evening, tired and quiet like always. The house lights were still on, which meant someone was awake. I tried to go straight to the shed, but I heard voices from the kitchen. Richard and Kinsley were laughing about something, the kind of laughter that always meant trouble for me. I decided to grab a glass of water before heading out, hoping they'd ignore me. When I walked in, the room went silent. Richard stood near the counter, his sleeves rolled up, looking far too relaxed. Kinsley sat on a stool, her phone in hand, smirking like she was waiting for a show. "Well, look who's here," Richard said with a grin that didn't match his eyes. "Our little guest from the shed." I didn't respond. I went to the sink, filled a glass, and kept my head down. I could feel Kinsley's eyes on me. "You should appreciate what we've done for you," Richard continued, stepping closer. "We've given you a place to stay, food, and safety. That's more than most people would do." His tone was calm, almost friendly, but his words made my hands tremble. I gripped the glass tighter. Kinsley giggled softly. "Yeah, Elara. Not everyone gets their own private house in the backyard." She lifted her phone and pretended to record, her voice dripping with mockery. "Say hi to the shed life." I set the glass down carefully, not trusting myself to speak. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. Richard leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. You know, maybe it's for the best. A shed suits you better than a real room. You were never good at fitting in anyway. Kinsley laughed again, a sharp, cruel sound that echoed through the kitchen. I turned to leave. I didn't say a word, didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. My hands were shaking, but my face stayed calm. I walked past them, through the hallway, and out the back door. The air outside felt colder than usual. Inside the shed, I sat for a long time, staring at the bag I'd kept ready for weeks. I'd been waiting for a moment like this, one final push to remind me why I couldn't stay any longer. I opened the bag and placed my father's will inside, along with the documents I'd collected. Then I looked around at the small space that had become my prison and felt a strange calm settle over me. Before leaving, I found a small piece of paper and a pen. I wrote just one line, "You'll understand what you've lost soon." I left it on the kitchen counter, right where Richard would find it. I walked down the driveway quietly, not looking back. For the first time in months, the night didn't feel cold. It felt like freedom. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew one thing for sure. When they realized what I had taken with me, their laughter would stop. I reached Martha's house late that night. She was one of my father's oldest friends, a kind woman with silver hair and steady eyes. I hadn't seen her in years, but when she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She just said, "Come in, honey," and handed me a blanket. For the first time in a long while, I slept in a real bed. No spiders, no cold air creeping through cracks. Just quiet. When morning came, I told her everything, from the shed to the forged papers to the will I found. She listened without interrupting, only nodding every now and then. When I finished, she leaned back and sighed. "Elara," she said, "your father trusted me with a copy of his will years ago. What you found sounds exactly like what he filed legally. If that's true, then Richard and your mother had no right to touch that property." Hearing those words made my throat tighten. I'd been holding my anger inside for so long that the confirmation felt almost unreal. Martha walked over to a cabinet and pulled out some old files. Together, we compared the papers I brought with her copies. Every signature, every stamp, it all matched perfectly. She looked at me seriously. "Everything they've done is invalid. Legally, that house belongs to you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. All the pain, humiliation, and betrayal I'd felt came rushing back. But this time it was mixed with something new, power. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I had proof. Martha helped me draft a motion to reclaim ownership of the property. She also filed for an emergency freeze on any potential sale Richard might attempt. He's planning to sell it under his name, I explained, showing her the emails I had taken photos of. He said my mom signed temporary rights over. "Then we'll stop him before he even gets that far," she said firmly. 3 days passed before late into the night, printing papers, I didn't recognize the number at first, and filling out forms. But when I answered, I watched Martha's steady hands move across each page with quiet confidence. She said quickly. It gave me strength just being there. Richard reminded me of the kind of person some kind of notice on the trust. It says the property is under legal review. When the final document was filed, I felt something. I could hear panic in her breathing. For months, the same kind she used to have when bills came late after my dad died. I held the truth that could take everything back. I didn't feel sorry. I didn't call my mother, letting her speak. I didn't want to warn her or soften the blow. Please. She had chosen to believe Richard, breaking, and she would face the consequences, saying someone sabotaged him. I wanted them both to feel the shock, do something. The exact same helplessness I didn't answer right away. Me live within that I just said, "I'll be there soon." As I lay in Martha's guest room that night, then I hung up. I stared at the ceiling. The drive back felt strangely but awake. The same road that used to make me feel small now felt like a line I was crossing on my own terms. When I pulled up to the house, the first thing I saw was the bright orange notice taped to the front door. Property under legal claim. Sale suspended. The curtains were half open, and through the window, I could see Richard pacing the living room, red-faced and shouting into his phone. Papers were scattered across the table. Kinsley sat on the couch, pale and silent, her hands twisting nervously. I walked past the shed without looking at it. I didn't owe it another glance. When I stepped inside, the air was thick with tension. Richard turned the moment he saw me. "You," he hissed, his voice sharp. "What did you do?" He was holding a crumpled document in his hand, the same one Martha and I had filed. His fingers were shaking. My mother stood behind him, her eyes red, looking between us like she didn't know who to believe. Kinsley's eyes darted to mine. She looked nothing like the smug girl who used to smirk at me from my own bed. Her things were all over the floor, clothes, makeup, half-open boxes like she'd tried to pack but didn't know where to go. I walked right past Richard, past my mother, and into my room. My posters were still gone, but I didn't care. It was mine again. I turned slowly and looked at all three of them standing there. "She's got the will," I said quietly, meeting Richard's eyes. "And the law." He went silent, his face tightening. Mom stepped forward, whispering, "Ilara, what does that mean?" "It means everything you tried to take from me was never yours," I said. "Not the house. Not my father's memory. Nothing." Kinsley started crying softly. Richard clenched his jaw, but he didn't say another word. He knew it was over. For the first time in months, the house felt still, not peaceful, but empty of power. I had walked out of this place broken, and now I'd walked back in owning everything they tried to steal. And as I stood there, looking around the room that was once taken from me, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: control. I spread the papers across the dining table one by one. My hands were steady, but my heart was pounding. My mother and Richard stood on the other side, their faces pale as they looked at the documents: property records, bank transfers, and a printed copy of my father's will. "This," I said, pointing at the first page, "is the original will. Dad left everything to me." Richard opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "And this," I added, sliding forward another sheet, "is the transfer document you forged. See the signature? It's not mine, and it's not Mom's. It's yours, Richard." The room went silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. My mother's hands were trembling as she reached for the paper. Her eyes darted across the lines, then she looked at the signature, her own name, written in someone else's handwriting. "I didn't sign this," she whispered. "No," I said quietly. "You didn't. But he did." Richard's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're just a kid. You think you can understand legal documents." I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. Martha did. She's the one who filed the motion that froze the sale. My mother turned toward him, confusion and fear mixing on her face. "What sale?" she asked, her voice rising. He looked away, but she grabbed his arm. "What sale, Richard?" He stayed silent. I slid one last document toward her, a real estate agreement with his name on it, showing he had planned to sell the house the following week and transfer the profit into an account under his name only. She stared at it for a long moment, and then her knees gave out. She sat down, tears streaming down her face. "You were going to leave me," she whispered. "You were going to sell everything and disappear." Richard tried to speak, but she shouted, her voice breaking. "You betrayed me. You used my daughter's pain to get what you wanted." He slammed his fist on the table. "I did what I had to. You think this house matters? She's just a spoiled girl who couldn't." "Enough," I said sharply. "You betrayed your own wife. You destroyed your own family. You don't get to talk about me anymore." The words hung in the air like something heavy and final. Kinsley stood in the doorway, tears running down her face. For once, she didn't look proud or cruel, just lost. When Richard turned to leave, she followed him silently, glancing back at me for only a second before walking out. The door slammed shut behind them, and the house fell quiet. Mom sat at the table, still crying softly, whispering apologies that didn't fix anything but still mattered somehow. I looked around the room, the walls, the pictures, the air that finally felt mine again. For the first time in months, there was peace. Not the kind that comes from forgiveness, but the kind that comes from truth. The house was finally silent, my house, my father's house, and it was enough. I didn't want revenge through chaos or shouting. I wanted peace, the kind that comes when truth wins quietly. I didn't press charges against Richard or Kinsley. The court handled everything once Martha filed the documents. The house was legally transferred back to my name, and every attempt Richard made to appeal was denied. He and Kinsley packed up what little they could and left town, angry and embarrassed. My mother stayed behind for a few weeks. She tried to talk to me, to explain herself. She said she was blinded by love, that she thought she was doing what was best for everyone. But when I looked at her, I saw someone who had chosen comfort over her own child. One night, while she stood in the kitchen crying, she whispered, "Can you ever forgive me, Ilara?" I didn't shout. I didn't even look away. I just said softly, "Forgiveness isn't a gift, Mom. It's earned." The next morning, she packed her things and left. I watched from the porch as her car disappeared down the road. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. For a while, the house felt empty. Too big, too quiet. But slowly, I started to fill it with my own life again. I brought in new furniture, painted the walls, and took back every corner that once felt stolen. Then one evening, as the sun was setting, I walked to the shed. The door still creaked the same way it had the night they forced me to move there. Inside, I could still see the faint marks on the floor where I used to sit, crying, wondering what I'd done wrong. But this time, I didn't cry. I smiled. Over the next few weeks, I cleaned it out, added a small desk, shelves, and a lamp. I turned it into a reading space, my sanctuary. Not as a punishment or a scar from the past, but as a reminder of how far I'd come. At night, when I sit by my bedroom window and look outside, I can see the light glowing from the shed. It reminds me of the girl who once slept there, scared, unwanted, forgotten. She didn't know she was stronger than all of them. She didn't know she would take back everything they tried to steal. Sometimes I think about my mother and wonder if she's okay. I don't hate her anymore, but I don't miss her either. I've learned that peace doesn't come from holding on. It comes from letting go. Days later, I heard from Martha that Richard and Kinsley were struggling. Their business had collapsed, and their new apartment lease fell through. My mother had tried to reach me again, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Their panic wasn't about losing the house or money. It was about realizing they'd lost control over me. I was no longer the quiet girl in the shed. I had rebuilt everything they tried to destroy, and I did it without revenge, just truth, strength, and a quiet kind of freedom that no one could ever take away again.